Chapter 49. The Point of No Return. The fissure returned them to the abyss with the slow inevitability of a wound reopening. Alden was the first to emerge. He did not take a full step at first, only slid his foot forward until his boot touched the outer stone, then held still, listening. The elven crystal hanging at his chest cast a pale halo that barely grazed the rock ahead, enough to reveal only damp textures and broken shadow. The air was colder than inside the hollow, carrying that metallic, ancient scent he had learned to associate with the abyss's formless vastness. Nothing moved. Nothing struck the stone. That meant nothing. Alden lifted his hand, closed his fist, then opened it slowly. The agreed signal. They would move. One by one, they followed. Sarah appeared behind him, light-footed, not allowing the brush of her boots to betray her position. Her weapons were wrapped in strips of cloth to prevent any telltale clink. Doran emerged next, slower. Each step measured, so the axe's weight would not send vibration through the rock. Cale came after, pale beneath the crystal light, lips pressed into a thin line. He walked upright, but Alden noted the slight delay in his breathing, the care with which he avoided certain movements. Dren slipped out almost unseen, as though the shadow itself had released him. Lyanna was last before Luthara. The wolf crossed the threshold without looking back. Body low and muscles tight, she advanced only a few steps before stopping again. Her tail did not move. Her ears caught every echo, every faint vibration that might betray what the crystals did not reveal. Alden brought up the rear. He did not close the fissure, such a thing was impossible. But he allowed himself a second to look into the dark interior they had left behind. The improvised vault no longer felt like shelter. It was merely another cavity, indistinguishable from the rest of the abyss, and the idea of remaining there any longer suddenly seemed absurd. Nothing down below truly protected. He gave one last signal, absolute silence. They moved on. There was no defined path. The terrain sloped downward in an uneven grade, broken by natural pillars of rock, formations that seemed to grow from floor and ceiling at once, tightening the space into narrow corridors that forced them into single file for stretches. In other places, the cavern opened abruptly, too broad, too empty, and the crystal's light vanished without touching anything that might give a sense of scale. Walking like that demanded more than strength or skill. It demanded constant attention. Each breath had to be controlled, each adjustment of gear anticipated. Alden felt the breastplate and the swords as conscious weight, something that could turn enemy if it struck the wrong stone. He forced himself to loosen his shoulders, to place his feet as he had as a boy. When Bram made him repeat the same path through the forge again and again without touching anything. The abyss amplified mistakes. After a span impossible to measure, minutes perhaps more, Dren raised his fist and all of them froze at once. Alden stepped forward until he stood beside him. Ahead, some 30 meters away, two silhouettes moved clumsily through the shadows. They were not running, not hunting. They were prowling. The crystals could barely tear their shapes from the dark, but there was no doubt, Krogars. Two, perhaps three. Their bodies blurred at times as if the rock were trying to claim them again. Dren signaled quickly, "Go around!" Not an order, an unspoken suggestion Alden accepted without argument. They backed away slowly, angling toward ground that rose slightly, forcing them to climb among jagged stone. Lyanna struggled most there, not from clumsiness, but from caution. Each handhold was tested before taking weight. Each brush was avoided. Sarah helped without touching her, pointing out safer holds with an extended finger. The Krogar's shadows fell behind them. Alden did not allow himself relief. Avoiding them did not make them less real. It only made them persistent. They continued. The abyss offered no landmarks, no sky, no clear ground. Only a succession of spaces opening and closing, corridors that seemed to lead to nowhere or everywhere at once. Silence grew thicker with every stretch they crossed, as though the place itself swallowed sound before it could fully form. Lyanna was the first to notice. She stopped without lifting a hand, but Alden was attentive enough to catch the change in her posture. He moved closer, careful. "What is it?" he whispered, barely moving his lips. She did not answer at once. She pointed ahead. There where the cavern narrowed again, something was different. Not a crack, not an irregular natural passage, but a wide, defined opening, an arch of rock that sank into darkness with a depth the crystals could not measure. The walls looked smoother, less capricious, as though shaped by the constant passage of something, water perhaps, over centuries. A passageway, not small, not immediate, a corridor that promised distance. Dren moved forward a step and studied the ground. He touched nothing. He only watched. The echo changes here, he murmured. Sound does not rebound the same way. Alden felt it too. Even without speaking, the air behaved differently near that entrance, as though the abyss held its breath there. Doran came close enough to stare into the dark beyond the crystal's reach. His eyes narrowed. If we go in there, he began. He did not finish. He did not need to. Alden glanced back along the route they had taken. No sign of pursuit, no shadow moving with urgency, no blows sounding against the stone. And yet the sense remained, as though something, somewhere they could not see, was still testing the space with patience. Then a distant impact reached them. Not loud, not near, but unmistakable. A deep rhythmic blow that made the ground beneath their feet tremble faintly. The sound traveled through the cavern and returned warped, unrecognizable, as if it had passed through too many walls before reaching them again. Luthera tensed at once. She did not growl. She did not retreat. She turned her head toward the passage, and then toward the echo behind them. Alden did not need to ask. If we stay here, Dren whispered, it finds us. And if we go in there, Sarah replied, we do not know what waits. Alden held both their gazes. For a second he remembered the dream. Hearthglen, the open streets, the square. There were no corridors like this in happy memories, but there was no choice. We go in, he said, single file, no rushing, no looking back. He did not raise his voice. He did not make a broad gesture. He did not need authority, only conviction. Dren nodded first. Sarah after. Lyanna drew in one slow breath and closed her eyes for the briefest instant, as though preparing to cross an invisible threshold. Alden stepped to the mouth of the passage and stopped where the crystal light ceased to matter. Beyond it, darkness gave nothing back. It was not a lack of light. It was something else. Something that seemed to drink it. One by one, Sarah indicated, I will go behind Lyanna. Dren took the lead without debate, his silhouette cut briefly against the corridor's mouth before vanishing into the black. Lyanna followed, then Kale, who clenched his teeth as he took the first step, refusing to show weakness. Doran went next, drawing the axe tight to his body so it would not scrape the rock. Luthera slipped in like living shadow. Alden went last. Before entering, he allowed himself one gesture he had avoided since leaving the fissure. He turned his head, far away, very far. Something struck the stone again. It was not close, but it was searching. Alden stepped forward and crossed the threshold into the dark passage. The open cavern fell behind him, and with it, the certainty that the worst things are not seen, they are felt. The wall of Cara-Dûm was not a straight line. From a distance, it looked like a clean cut in the mountain, a clear border between the outer world and the dwarves' eternal stone. Up close, it was something living, irregular outcroppings, hidden fissures, treacherous shifts that turned each step into a negotiation with gravity. Riven moved close to the rock, wrapped in thick layers against the cutting cold of the heights. He wore no black armor to announce his presence. He needed no symbols now, only silence. Wind blew steadily, driving gusts of dry snow against the wall. Below, the land fell away in abrupt slopes that vanished into morning fog. Above, the stone rose without concession, indifferent to anyone trying to read its secrets. He had been walking for hours. The sun was already high when he saw it. A thread of water ran down the wall, barely perceptible, breaking the rock's monotony with a dark, glistening line. Not a river, not a cascade, only a narrow stream that seemed to spring from within the mountain and disappear below, swallowed by the terrain. Riven approached with care. The opening was there, where the water slipped between two blocks of stone, a narrow, irregular gap, barely large enough to admit a body, if that body was willing to crawl. He crouched, watched the flow, listened, no voices, no footsteps, only the stream's constant murmur, and the wind striking higher stone. He unfastened the bag at his shoulder and tied it firmly to his ankle with a short length of rope. He checked the knots twice. Then he removed his outer cloak, folded it as best he could, and secured it beside the bag. No more hesitation. He slid into the opening. The first stretch was uncomfortable but manageable. The rock was cold and wet, and the water soaked his sleeves almost at once. He moved sideways at first, turning his torso to find the right angle. Each motion was slow, measured, mindful that a mistake could leave him wedged there. The passage tightened. Riven had to press his chest to stone and advance by driving himself forward with forearms and knees. Water ran down his neck and seeped under his clothing, stealing heat with cruel efficiency. He drew a deep breath. The tunnel sloped slightly downward, and in some places the stream gained strength, forcing him to dip his head beneath the water to move forward. In those moments, the world narrowed to pressure, darkness, and the absolute necessity of not panicking. He did not know how long he had been inside. The very notion of time dissolved into the repetition of minimal movement. Gain an inch, stop, breathe, gain another. The stones seemed to tighten around him, as if the mountain mistrusted his presence. At one point, the tunnel narrowed further. Riven became stuck, not with a sudden block, gradually. Stone pressed against his chest, his shoulders, his hips. He tried to push forward and could not. He tried to pull back as water pressed against him. Air grew scarce. For the first time since he entered, doubt appeared clearly, not as fear, as calculation. If he forced the passage, he might become trapped for good. If he retreated, he was not certain he could turn his body. The pressure was constant, implacable, and cold had begun to numb his fingers. He closed his eyes, and then, as it had so many times before, memory spoke. Not an image, a voice. When the body fails, Master Thorian had said, only the will remains. And when the will fails, then you have already lost, even if you still breathe. Riven clenched his teeth. To die fighting, that grave voice continued, does not always mean holding a weapon. Sometimes it means not yielding when no one can see you. He opened his eyes. There was no room for brute strength. He knew it. So he forced himself to stop, to control his breathing, to reduce it until his chest barely moved. He waited until his heartbeat stopped pounding in his ears. Then, with movements so small they were nearly imperceptible, he rotated his left shoulder a fraction farther. He let the water wash over his head without resisting. He pushed with the tip of his foot, not his knee. He slid. The rock gave. Not much, but enough. He moved forward. The tunnel continued to demand every fragment of his attention. There were moments when water covered his face completely, stealing vision and breath. Others when the passage seemed to widen only to tighten again a few yards later with cruel intent. Cold reached the bone. Muscles began to protest, not with sharp pain, but with a deep, treacherous fatigue that urged him to stop for just 1 second too long. Riven did not allow it. He could not stop. He could not go back. At some point, the tunnel began to rise. The current weakened. Water no longer covered his face, instead running back behind him. The stone, still narrow, no longer felt determined to crush him. A faint gleam appeared ahead, not direct light. Reflection. Riven pushed the last yards with what strength remained. The passage opened abruptly and expelled him at last into sunlight on the far side of the wall, where the stream continued its course into the mountain's interior. He fell onto his side, gasping. For several seconds he did not move. His body trembled. He did not know whether from cold, effort, or the brutal release of tension. Water soaked his clothing and the stone froze his skin, but he was out. He had crossed. When he finally managed to rise, bracing against the wall, he lifted his gaze. He did not know exactly where he was, but the direction was clear. Forward and upward. Riven closed his eyes for one more moment, not to rest, but to seal the decision he had made when he entered that tunnel. There was no return, and there would be no witnesses. He stood and moved on, alone in the mountain, certain that the path he had chosen was not meant to be shared, and that he would walk it to the end regardless.